Very good. Okay, welcome everyone. My goodness, what a full house here. This is exciting. Hi everyone, my name is Noshir Contractor. I'm a faculty member at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to moderate this panel, which is an ICA 75 anniversary special session titled Generative AI, Transforming, Disrupting Communication Scholarship, followed by a weird punctuation mark that you may not have heard of. It's a question mark and an exclamation on top of each other. And it's supposed to indicate that this is a question and a celebration, a celebration and a problematization at the same time. I'm delighted that we were able to put together an all-star cast of panelists here, and they are starting at this end on the right-hand side here. I want to start with what we generally know him as Winston Peng from Michigan State University, and then to his right, we have Andrea Guzman from Northern Illinois University. To his right, we have Claes Vreese from the University of Amsterdam, from ASCOR. To his right, we have Jörg Matthes from the University of Vienna. And on the extreme right, in person, is Yingdan Lu, my colleague at Northwestern. And then joining us on Zoom is Ognyanova, who is at Rutgers University. So again, I'm delighted to welcome all of you panelists. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I think you're in for a treat. I have a small announcement that I would probably want to start with to see if the audio would work on that. Let me just
Today we're digging into a source that really, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into a source that really gets to the core of a huge shift happening. I'm talking about generative AI.
That's right. And our source material today is, it's the agenda discussion points from a pretty important panel session. It's happening at ICA at 75. They're bringing together experts from all different parts of communication scholarship to really wrestle with this AI.
And our mission here for this deep dive is to quickly pull out the main questions this panel is tackling. Like, how is AI fundamentally changing the tools scholars use? From the very start of an idea, right through gathering data, analysis, even how they write it all up.
Yeah, and what's really striking in the source is how clear it makes it that Gen AI isn't just like another software update. It's actively transforming things, disrupting them, sometimes even consolidating how research is done across the whole process.
The whole thing, literature reviews, data collection, analysis writing, it's touching basically everything. But
okay, so as you probably guessed, that was an AI-generated podcast using Notebook LM that allows, all it took as input was the program description that you saw for today, but it gives you an idea of how unnerving and how uncanny some of these things can be in this particular context. So enough of that. I think we will not have any more Notebook LM. What I've asked each of our panelists to do here is in 2 minutes to give us the most important takeaway that they have on this particular topic. As you can see that this particular group that we have here brings together a lot of diversity from our field in terms of perspectives, in terms of subfields within communication, in terms of geography. And we are very, in terms of prioritizing having experiences, both in terms of editorial experiences. We have editors here. We have people who have led large centers in this area. And we also have a lot of diversity in terms of some of the people, I'll put myself in this category, at the aged end of this, and then we have some of the young stars as well. So we have a lot of diversity in terms of expertise and age as well. So with that, shall we start with you, Winston? Okay, your 2 minutes starts now.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'd like to start with a very simple but provocating idea, and is large language models are not just tools we use, and they are starting to reshape the way we do research. So in communication research, we have long relied on methods like content analysis, survey, and experiment. But large language models do not just plug into those existing methods. They change what's possible and sometimes what can be counted as evidence in our empirical studies. So take content analysis as an example. And we have been all trained into to seek intercoder reliability and intercoder agreement. But large language models are now allowing us to simulate different perspectives, liberal, conservative, demographic, ideological. So that means we may be able to move from aiming for consensus to actually studying disagreement. So what we call dialectic intersubjectivity in one of our recent papers. And also in survey research, large language models allow us to simulate the responses from different kinds of people. And so this opens up new ways to model public opinion, but it also raises very tough questions for all of us, and who is being represented, and what kind of biases are we producing or reproducing. So these risks are not just technical. I mean, they are epistemological. So this is more philosophical, abstract questions. And in experiment, large language models do even more, and they don't just deliver stimuli, and they can personalize messages, adapt in real time, and even as simulated participants. So are we studying humans or we are modeling systems? So even Laswell's classical question, who says what, to whom, through which channel, with what effects, and takes on new meanings in the age of AI. And when both the whom and the whom might be simulated. So what does effect mean when the responses are generated by our model? So, yeah. Okay, so one final, large language model gives us new power, but also new uncertainty. So we can discuss the uncertainty.
Thank you, Andrea.
Hello, I'm Andrea Guzman. My research focuses on human-machine communication and more toward thinking about ontology and ethics. And when I think about the integration of AI into research and the implications, I'm thinking more on the ontological and philosophical. I'm thinking more on, the questions we tend to ask around this has to do with the doing, right? And this also goes into our teaching. But at its essence, what does it mean to be a researcher? How can we think differently between the doing and being? And so I think of this as an opportunity to really take some time to reflect on what does it mean to be a scholar? What is the essence of what we are striving for? But at the same time, I feel that there is a danger, and I'm not the only one who's talked about this. Steve Jones also talked about this at our human-machine communication pre-conference, is that anytime we talk about artificial intelligence, we tend to talk about efficiency. And man, we as scholars, as researchers, we like efficiency, right? We want to be more efficient. But we can only be so efficient. And so when we start to introduce artificial intelligence, and we've seen this in other areas of labor, the demands on what we're supposed to be doing go up, right? You just, instead of it helping you, then we're going to expect more and more and more. And where does it end? And so I think there really needs to be some thinking when it comes to the use and the integration of artificial intelligence throughout being a researcher and an educator, really thinking about what are we doing, why are we doing it?
Thank you, Andrea. Give us back 10 seconds there. The issue of how do we balance efficiency with depth and originality is one we will definitely be coming back to. Claes, the floor is yours.
It's on. I lost the 10 seconds I could have gotten from Andrea there. Anyway, Claes, University of Amsterdam and University of Southern Denmark. I'm going to make three sort of meta comments to get us started. One thing that keeps me busy is thinking, how do we in our research practices create some kind of a space where we can experiment? The opening remarks in the audio sort of suggest that in the entire chain of doing research, whether it's from ideation, creation, to code, to reviews, to writing, editing, how can we create some spaces where we can actually experiment with this so we get it done and don't only talk about it and learn from the mistakes? So the challenge of creating these pockets where we can use it and learn collectively. That's one, I think, challenge that we have in front of us. A second challenge that I see is that any guidance that we will have on this is going to be extremely fluid. If you compared it to some of the work that has been done on guidelines in journalism and the use of AI there, you see how rapidly things and thinking change in this area. And I think we also simply have to embrace this. We are going to talk about where we are today in this very moment in time in June in 2024. 75, but in a year from now, we will be thinking differently about that. And that's another challenge we simply have to accept as a starting point and build that into how we move forward. And the third challenge I will put out from now on is to say, I don't think that everybody in the communication field needs to be an AI scholar going forward, but I do think that every single of us, one of us, has to think about what this does. I can hardly think of any of our themes or our divisions or our ways of working that will not be infected or impacted one way or another. Maybe infected is not the right word. So that's the third sort of meta comment, is not everything is about AI, but it's hard to think of something that is not in some way affected by this development. So that's my third observation.
Thank you, Claes. Jörg?
Thanks a lot. I'm Jörg Matthes from the University of Vienna. Some brief remarks. First of all, when we look at panels like this and the discussion, I think there's a negative bias. And I would like to take a counter position on this panel, also in the sake of a discussion. First of all, I think AI is already being used throughout the research process. And now we have this discussion whether this should be declared or admitted. And what I think we should destigmatize the use of AI. We should fully embrace this. We should make it a normal process of the research, of our research. And that would also mean that's not a stigma anymore and that everyone would declare it because it's something that we regularly do. What's the point of writing an abstract myself if I can generate, if I can do this for me much better and much faster? Think about it. And people do it already. So rather than pretending we're not doing it, I think we should embrace it. And also, I think there are a couple of misunderstandings. We have these doomed scenarios. And the key misunderstanding is we enter a question and we get the answer and we put it in the paper. That's not how it works. It's a creative process, and the creative process lies in the back and forth in the conversation that you are having with AI. And if you consider this, I would argue that it makes us not only more efficient and faster, it also makes us more creative, if you understand it as a conversation. And also, I would argue it does not necessarily lead to a mainstreaming of scholarly ideas. It can lead to a diversification. And I hope I have the time later on to back up this argument. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yingdan.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Yingdan Lu. So most of my research has been focusing on how we can develop frameworks to understand multimodal content, like how do you analyze millions of video data to make sense of like communication questions. So I think like because of this like research trend, I would say like one of the opportunities I would like to highlight is how the generative AI has been like providing more opportunities for this multimodal turn in like computational like communication in particular. So for example, like I think in the 2 of our work, we have found like the visual large language models like OpenAI GPT and also Gemini, they can not only like help you to make sense of visual content through zero shot, but also it can help you to navigate more variables that we were taken for granted, like using their like reasoning ability. But then like I think like the question at the same time is like what it means by like validation, and also what it means by like are we redefining the replication like process in this content sense making process, and also like how do we ensure like we use the tools very ethically when we're like using them to analyze content, and also what kind of content we're analyzing, right? And also the second thing I want to highlight is that as like we're like embracing this like development, I would say like this development like have called for a shift of how we train the next generation of researchers who want to leverage those tools. So for example, I teach computational methods at Northwestern, and I found like it's really challenging for me to teach this year because I'm remaking all of my syllabus. And then like I want to teach like students like the best tool that very like state of the art. But the question is like how can we leverage like the educational resources and also all the technological advances to incorporate those in like training them. And also like what it means by like training is that like whether like this is more a technical like coding strategy, or like we're just training their computational mindset without like training more like in coding, like no longer like leveraging those. So I think like those will be like the 2 things I want to highlight, and then I want to like learn from everyone from. Thank you.
Excellent. And last but not the least, we have Katya, who looks like she's in a high-tech podcast studio. So Katya, the screen is yours.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And I am very sorry not to be with you in person. I had to cancel last minute. So you'll never know whether I'm actually an LLM on your screen or a real person. That will remain a mystery. Yeah, Katherine or Katya Ognyanova. I'm at Rutgers University. And so people have talked about thinking about generative AI as an object of study just now, and as a research tool that helps us generate or analyze data or write or edit or proofread. I wanted to mention a few other ways in which generative AI is important to research. So for example, one major new thing that is emerging is generative AI as a confounding factor, right? So one of the teams that I work on, for example, does massive online surveys in all 50 states. And this research depends a lot on being able to tell whether your respondents are human or not. And increasingly, we will be unable to do that reliably. We already are starting to see that happen. Similarly, I do a lot of research that analyzes social media and online content, and it is also now already very hard to tell whether the content has been written by humans or AI, right? So LLM is also something that we need to think about as a confounding factor in our research that tries to evaluate humans, right? One more place that I think about Gen AI is as on the positive side, as Jörg mentioned, as a theory building partner, right? I think we can use generative AI to stress test hypotheses or look for alternative explanations or do cross-disciplinary connections that we can see on our own. So that's nice. I also think it's important to think of Gen AI not just as something that helps us do research, but also as a tool that helps us do science communication. Okay, so people talk to LLMs very frequently these days about science and medicine. And so it's a key distribution channel for us as well as a research tool. And then finally, something that Yingdan just mentioned, I think we are will be well positioned to think about LLM as a tool to train upcoming researchers as well, right? So I'll stop here. I hope we can expand more on these as we start our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Katya. Thank you all for staying on time. That was really good. I was going to mention that Reid Hoffman, who was the founder of LinkedIn, has recently been going on the web and many of these interviews and saying that the world can be classified, the people whose views on AI can be classified into doomers, gloomers, zoomers, and bloomers. And I think that we have some representation, as you can imagine, of those. Doomers are the ones who think that AI poses an existential threat. Gloomers are the ones who think there are big benefits, but they are oversold, and the near-term pain is certain. The zoomers, on the other hand, are like progress, precaution to the wind. You know, we don't need to worry if you're going to Mars. Now is not the time to worry about overpopulation on Mars. Let's just go there first, and then we can figure that out. And then the bloomers are the ones who are more cautiously optimistic. These are the ones who says, yes, we've invented the ship, but when we invent the ship, we also invent the shipwreck. And we need to be thinking about the shipwreck now rather than to later on, et cetera. So I think we have some element of those in all of our presentations that we heard in the opening remarks that we heard out here. I think one of the things that we would like to be able to see, and we've already seen previews of it, is that it has implications that we would want to discuss in terms of the research workflow impacts that we've talked about, including things like efficiency with depth and originality. We also have heard about the epistemological and methodological concerns that can be raised in this area. Research integrity and academic merit is a big one that I think we may want to spend some time talking about. Of course, ethics, equity, global perspectives on this. And then finally, institutional and publication policies, which may even touch on what ICA has to do about these issues. So let me go ahead and ask first, if you could spend a few minutes talking about the research workflow impacts. How are you seeing AI tools used in various stages of lit review, data collection, analysis, writing, dissemination, perhaps based on your own examples, or perhaps based on why you chose not to use AI as part of those work tools? I'll go ahead and let's start. Who wants to go first? We don't have to follow this linear thing. We can go zigzag on this, including Katya. Yeah, you want to go first? Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So I think like that's related to like the multi-model turn I mentioned, because I remember like when I was first entering into like the multi-model analysis or computational multi-model analysis field, I remember like how I took those like very laborious like computer vision classes where I do lots of hard coding, and then like I feel like this is really like constrained like by like the technological like ability that I have, or I got trained. But I feel like one of the things that my students, they have been like working on is like they're using like the GPT to help them generate code for this like multimodal analysis. Especially, I feel like a lot of the computer vision tasks are very like deep into like pixels, and also those are very like hard to like elaborate like if you don't have this training. But actually, I feel like Gen AI has been like lower the barrier for this. So I think like this is actually like a good thing that for like efficiency to like to start with.
And multimodal, the multimodal data that you're talking about is when not just relying on text, but combining it with audio, video,
like audio, video,
maybe even
like,
VR and AR
exactly.
in that context.
Or like
also.
temporal like network, those, yeah, exactly.
Yes, very good. Those are important points. Yes, Winston.
So in terms of the research efficiency, I have always been thinking about, are we becoming more efficient in our research with these kind of new data sources or new tools? From my own personal experience, I don't think so. And because we need to deal with more challenges and more issues in our new data and new sources. Say, for example, when we use the large language model to do the content analysis, we still need to go back to the manual coding to do the validation. But why we want to still embrace these new tools in our research? And my idea is that it can help us approximate, get close to the ground truths in a much more precise way. So that's why in my own research, I started to use computational methods and now AI tools in my own research. And yeah, so that I don't think efficiency is the only consideration, but we have other considerations that help us to push us to adopt these tools. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think something that's important to keep in mind, and I constantly hype about, is AI is not AI, is not AI, is not AI. We tend to talk about AI as this like grandiose thing, but the applications, and here we're talking about generative AI, but it's important to note that like narrow AI has not gone away, and even generative AI can vary depending on the application, as well as we want to think about like where we're situated with our research. So I'm a qualitative scholar. And so for me, a bigger use of AI might be something like Otter AI to like automatically transcribe, right? And so the ethical questions, the use questions are very different from more of a complicated computational question. But I think it's also important to think about the range of scholarship within communication. I think there's a kind of a heavy bias in talking about AI related to social science research. But as someone who spans both social science and the humanities, where actually it is actually really important to think about humanities scholars put a lot of work into how they phrase things, how they say things. And so those implications will be different across those different communities. So I think one of the things that needs to happen when we discuss these workflows is that it depends on the type of application, also the type of research and what's valued within that research community.
Yes, please.
Maybe two observations. So my favorite right now in terms of describing the best use of it is the observation of calling it the best colleague that you have, that you can chat with, that you can spare with, and you don't have to drink coffee with, and you can end the conversation when you want it. And I kind of like that metaphor for that's Jörg's embracing of it, right? Because that actually is a creative process. And I also do that if I give talks. I'll chat about what my intention was with the talks and the ideas that I had, and let me be challenged by it. So I like that metaphor for it. And then another example is a computer science colleague that's trained a model using all of their group's publications. And basically they're done with writing. So they do rather incremental small pieces in their work, and they just want to get the latest findings out. Their papers are short. They were not particularly vested in the writing process to begin with, and they've trained a model that'll simply do a first draft paper for them so that they can plug in the latest results on what it is that they're working on. I find that a fascinating way of doing, and they're cutting real time in their process for something that to them, which is very different from a lot of what we do, and others would have very different opinions on that. But I do find that in terms of the workflow is one that makes a lot of sense for me. Why? Because they've trained a model that actually works only on their own publications, and they can even pump up the writing style based on which of their group members are on that paper and make it a bit more juicy in that direction. They learned a lot about their own writing styles by having this as their first drafter.
Very good. And Andrew McAfee has said that AI can be thought of in terms of 3 C's: the clerk, the colleague, and the coach.
Yes.
All 3 in some ways capture that. Yes.
Wonderful. I'd like to back up what Winston has just said. I think the efficiency argument is not the most important argument. It's maybe the most obvious argument when you start talking about generative AI. But the most important argument to me is how it can help us to produce better research. And I do experimental research. And experimental research, it's not only you can do things in terms of stimuli creation that is so time consuming, so extensive in the old days, and you can tackle some of the nagging problems that you have in terms of internal and external validity with the help of AI. However, of course, always with human oversight and human judgment, and of course, necessary validation of this. So if you only talk about efficiency, it's actually misleading, because AI simplifies the research process, but at the same time, it also makes it more complicated. But what you really get out of this is you get added value in terms of being able to do things that you weren't able to do otherwise. There are new ways to generate knowledge. And this also means to me as a European scholar to provide people with an opportunity to engage in a research process because of language barriers, for instance, or because of engaging in a scholarly debate, having access, given that given at least as of now that some forms of AI are publicly available for everyone, which is of course a very important precondition for this. It creates a lot of opportunities for us to have more global research, to are in exchange with ideas from different areas that we would probably not see or not be able to process ourselves, and all these things. Yes, it can also make us more efficient, but this just reminds me on, I guess, the old days when you had to do data analysis in the 80s and you would go to the data computational center and next day you could come back and get the findings. Yes, maybe this is now faster with the personal computer, but that's not the most important thing because the research did not change. Now what happens is that the research can change the way we generate knowledge. And I think this is the most exciting part. Of course, with, we need to discuss about this in terms of transparency and human oversight and red lines, very importantly. But if we do this, I think there are great opportunities.
Katya, did you want to say something on this topic?
Yeah, just briefly, as a computational research, one of the interesting things for me that is happening is that we are moving towards, again, many people talked about new ways of generating knowledge or producing meaning. And so we're moving more towards very advanced and nuanced simulations that at some point people have tried to use them to even replace human subject research, or at least, which I don't think is quite feasible, or that ever will be quite feasible, but at least serve as a pretest or first step towards understanding human behavior that we can then again stress test and figure out some kinks of it, and then invite our actual human subjects. There's obviously challenges with these systems being biased or narrow-minded in some ways, but on the flip side, researchers are often also biased and narrow-minded, and so I find that the LLMs are often able to broaden my horizon in certain ways. For example, disciplinary ways. I'm pretty multidisciplinary, but still I'm rooted in some specific theoretical frameworks. And so bringing in understandings from across the different fields that speak to the same relevant subject, but kind of in different terminology, has been quite helpful for me as a use of large language models. So
thank you, Katya. So,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead. I want to just mention that I'm hoping that we'll have at least 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So please be thinking about your brilliant questions before we end this session. One of the things that I took away from this conversation that we had was the tendency that we know from all technologies, including especially general purpose technologies, such as the automobile and the steam engine, which also has the abbreviation GPT coincidentally. But all of these technologies, we first adopt them because we think they're going to substitute for what we want, what we're already doing. And that leads to that efficiency argument, except that we've also learned that when we, for example, some of us are old enough to remember when you move from a typewriter to a word processor, we thought, oh, a word processor is like a typewriter, but without the erase marking, etc. And so we thought we'll get our papers written more quickly. Well, think again, because once you had the word processor, it became so easy to revise it that we actually spend more time working on the paper, so that efficiency was actually lost. And it has been true in many of these cases. When Jörg talked about analysis, the same thing. We would go and come back the next day and get it. But now if it's available so easily, interactively, we're going to spend much more time doing the analysis because we have the ability to do it. So that efficiency argument is lost. And what I also heard from many of the panelists is the notion of reimagining what that research looks like, because the payoffs to our field are not going to come by simply thinking of Gen AI as a substitute or just to enlarge and do more of the same thing. We have to think hard about how it can reimagine what we're doing. The next item on this agenda was epistemological and methodological concerns. So how might the use of Gen AI shift the types of questions we ask, the kinds of data we privilege, or the methods we adopt in communication research?
Okay, yeah. So that's a very fundamental question, and I have been always asking since I started to use computational methods a decade ago. And so I think the paradigm remains there, but we need to add new elements to that. And say, for example, for the research design, and we still need to think about the conceptualization and operationalization. Every old principle still applies to our new research with AI or without AI. And the theoretical questions we ask, we still need theory, we still need design, and we still need to worry about the validity and either measurement validity or causal validity. They are all there. But what's new here is that it changed the way we, as I just mentioned, we consider as the evidence. And say when we study the effects, when both AI can write into the interaction of both aids, the source of the interaction and the recipients of the interaction, are we really studying human beings or the system itself? So that's the question. When I read those papers with AI chatbot as the stimuli generator or something else, I always think about that. Of course, I don't have a clear answer to that, but we need to define what are the effects we want to pursue in this kind of research, what the media effects, and who are our audience in our research. Yeah, that's my.
For me, this is just an entire area of research, how it changes research. That's where my mind goes, because this is like my area. I think anytime, I think of this in terms of social configurations. So you've heard people on this panel talk about, their interactions with AI help them to be more creative. Like there's this meaning making process that's occurring. And anytime we have new entities, right? Anytime, this is why we had labs with people. We put together labs with people to help us think. And now artificial intelligence is coming into that. And how that changes, I mean, that's the big question we're still trying to figure out. And that's a great area of research, graduate students who are looking for an area of research, to think about. But there are going to be profound changes. We do want to really think about, though, in terms of the AI systems and where they're being built and where they're being used. And also think about, equalities and inequalities that come in as well with that.
So I think my thinking in this area is rather rudimentary still, because I don't see a method or an approach where it could not be improved, right? Whether you're doing content analysis or trying to work with qualitative interview data, or whether you're trying to create a vast array of stimuli for experimental research, all of that holds tremendous potential. But I don't see us having a good answer to what we do with all the things that we share in that process, right? And here comes really some of those fundamental questions. If you use this also to analyze your highly sensitive interview data, if you use it in the generation of new material that is then used beyond your experimental research, I don't think we have come to a good way of thinking about that, our generous sharing of some of the most core things that we have, namely our raw data. So this is not a good answer, but a thing I struggle with.
Wonderful. When it comes to the analysis of the data, I actually agree, because we have one issue that is a little bit concerning, is the kind of replicability. As the tools develop, the question is, of course, if I use AI in the process of research, could other scholars replicate my analysis later on if the tools have actually changed and developed. So this black box problem is a serious one for me. Having said that, when we talk about this big concern of mainstreaming the academic concern by the use of AI, this is one of the big concerns, right? That we all will reiterate the common theories and paradigms and methods, and AI will just accelerate this process. Well, that may happen, but that AI is biased, but also we as humans are biased. We are highly biased, and we are highly engaging in this mainstreaming process already. So it's not like that we are very diverse and now we get this a mainstreaming process or homogenization process coming because of AI. No, it's already going on, and AI just gives it back to us. But the big difference is that I can, if I understand AI as a conversation partner, I can also reflect on it. So the question is not if we use it or if we should not use it. The question is how we use it. So how can we use it in a meaningful way so we can overcome these biases? And we can maybe even overcome these problems in a better way than we were able to do so in the past. Because if we have different perspectives, and we as humans sometimes in polarized environments, we even have problems understanding each other, right? But for AI, there may be a bias, but I can also ask, for instance, ChatGPT to reflect on that or to give me a counter argument. Or I can ask what would Claes and Noshir say about my argument in this panel this morning. So this is a great opportunity to reflect. So if we use it appropriately, I think there are some red lines. The red lines are when we use human judgment. For me as an editor, it's a red line if peer review is done by AI. This is a big problem because the judgment should always be with us, the final judgment. But if we keep that in mind, I think that these methodological and epistemological challenges that we are facing, I think that we will be able to tackle them.
So can I?
Yes, please.
I just want to respond to that for a moment. And I think this is, a great tool to think with, right? But this question of bias keeps on coming up. And I think it's really important to remember, and I hear this kind of misunderstanding of AI quite a bit. And everyone up here understands artificial intelligence, but for people who have not interacted or you haven't studied or you don't understand how it works, LLMs don't give you answers like you're searching. It's based on probability. They're putting together information based on probability. And this has come up at several academic conferences I've been at, where someone is like, well, I didn't understand how, ChatGPT got an answer. So I asked it and it told me how it got the answer. No. Okay, I cannot stress this enough. It doesn't know what it's doing. I'm going to use like Emily Bender, kind of term here. It's fancy math. And that is so important to stress. So for example, if you are talking with ChatGPT and it gives you a suggestion and you say, hey, ChatGPT, that's actually wrong, it will change its response toward you. And so I think we also, and there's some recent research that came out that actually kind of shows how it kind of gives back to us what we want because it starts to learn what we want. And so I think, everything, all humans are biased, all technologies are biased. And I think it's important to also take into account not just like, is it biased toward English or is it which it is it biased toward, the male perspective, which it is. But the more we use it and the more it gets used to us, then it gets biased toward our perspective. You see, so it becomes a very tricky widget. And I think AI is great. I think it can expand what we do, but I just wanted to make clear for those of you in the audience, because this is part of the discourse that happens around artificial intelligence. We think it's intelligent, and because we think it communicates like us, it thinks like us, and that is not the case.
So I will make two comments, and I can see hands going up. So Katya, I think you may need to use your raise hand if you want to say something so that we don't miss out on it, or I don't put you on the spot unnecessarily. Two quick comments about this. You're right, it's not a large language, it is a large language model, not a large knowledge model. And Emily Bender, who you brought up, you use the fancy math. My favorite phrase is she called it a stochastic parrot,
Right.
that it was
Yes.
repeating anything, but based on probability and stochastic. So that's another way in which she's described that I find fascinating. Who wanted to go next? Yeah, I think Jörg, yeah.
Maybe very quickly, just to back that up, AI is creating bullshit.
Yeah.
That's what it is. But it is with us, it's with us to generate the meaning.
Right.
So we have this misunderstanding that AI writes the text, AI does the analysis, AI does this, gives me the answer, and so on and so forth. But all of this is nonsense. It doesn't mean anything. But it is something that can spark the discussion. Right. I can use it as a conversation partner. And this is the critical moment, not to replace humans, but to have something to generate insight, but with this mindset, of course, in a way that I wasn't able to do that before. But that's very important. We can't take it as a crown truth. It's not the truth. It's just words.
But then
right?
sometimes we can say that some of our colleagues are also falling into the same BS description that you said. And why would we expect to hold AI to a higher standard than that? I think, Andrea, before we go to Yingdan, Andrea, the other thing you mentioned about how it adapts to us, a lot of the vocabulary that is used to do that is sycophancy, where Gen AI becomes a sycophant and just tells you how wonderful you are and how absolutely right you are. And in fact, ChatGPT had to dial that back a little bit because people were complaining that they were uncomfortable with how agreeable Gen AI was. Yes, Yingdan.
Yeah, I think like this is a very like valuable point to dig into, because I feel like when we're thinking of like using like Gen AI, I was thinking of like we can also like guide it to learn deeper knowledge, even it's not perfect, even it's like sometimes making nonsense, but actually like we can guide this to learn deeper knowledge. So for example, like I think a lot of like research right now, like leveraging like VLM is trying to say like, hey, like there are two people in this visual, like, or in this like image, but can we use that to understand what's the relationship between this two person? I think like some of the works in computer science has already like touched upon this like domain where like I think like it can like be used to derive more like deeper knowledge, which I hope like social science researcher can leverage this and then like making more sense or like digging more deeper into this area.
And indeed, a lot of in the AI community, there's a lot of division between the Gen AI people who are now seen as just the latest and the greatest, and what is called a symbolic AI that goes back decades. And now there is a call to merge these two, and the symbolic AI is on focusing more on logic and knowledge. And Jan LeCun, who is at Meta and also at NYU, is one of those pushing for the merger between the stochastic parrot and some of the more traditional semantic web approaches that brings more of the knowledge that Yingdan was talking about. Okay, Katya has a hand up.
That's right. I was just going to say, so we've talked about how, you know, one of the things that we are going to enjoy about Gen AI is that it's going to just massively help us scale us the analysis of qualitative data. Something that we haven't quite mentioned is that it's also going to massively scale up how much work we have to do in the near future, because right now, anytime you want to use Gen AI, what you have to do is validate it against previous iterations of AI and machine learning, validate it against humans, and then seek out the points of contention and the biases that it has. So for example, we talked about acquiescence bias. It likes to say yes. So until we learn about these things, these various kind of issues and biases, and are able to understand the areas where it works and where it doesn't, instead of saving us work, is going to create a lot more work for us, just validating every single thing we do with Gen AI. And as we said, it's evolving very quickly, and there's differences between different models. So even if you validate one model at the present point in time, tomorrow there's going to be a next model that's going to behave differently. And so there's going to be a long process for us where we're trying to catch up to. It helps us so much, scales up our research, but we also have to do so much more work to actually show that what it's doing is valid. So that's where I am with the methodology.
Okay, one closing comment from Winston before we switch
I just
topic.
want to make add one thing is that when we talk about the randomness in ChatGPT's answer or large language model's answer on the black box there, and so if we think about the past methods, and this kind of thing has been there. Even think about the human beings, and we have the randomness when we give an answer to a survey question. Do we? I think so. And also, do you think human beings is also like a black box? We try to unravel these blacks to look into your mind and try to understand how you will have this perception. So I mean, these kind of issues, bias, black box, randomness, uncertainty, they have been there. And these kind of things in large language model may be carried over from human beings to the models. It can be new there. And so I think we need to play with it, and not just play, and it's to stay with it, try to embrace it in our research and try to understand that. Yeah. So
I think just as a comment, one of the things that people have complained about AI, especially those who are pushing for explainable AI, say that it's too bad that my keyboard doesn't have the Y button, WHY, to say, why did it give me this response? And of course, we, on the other hand, as you point out, when you go to a doctor or go to any expert and they give us an opinion, they're often they're not able to answer the why question themselves. In fact, this was the reason the original AI expert systems from the 1970s and 80s failed, is they were incapable of getting experts to say why they were giving the expert answers they were. And so there is that conundrum that exists amongst humans. I want to turn next, before we go to questions here, the last two topics, and I'm just going to throw some of these issues here: research integrity and academic merit, an important issue for us. So what should be the role of human creativity and judgment in AI-assisted research outputs? How should we think about authorship and credit? We have editors here. When AI contributes to parts of the research, how transparent should scholars be about their use? Should journals mandate AI use declarations? And finally, the line between augmentation and automation, this is an issue also that just came up, is blurry. How do we define appropriate or inappropriate use of AI in these contexts? So whoever wants to go first, we'll just have a back and forth.
And we had a panel.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, 2 days ago about the AI in communication research from an editor's perspective. Nico was there, Jörg was there, I was there. And so the major takeaway from that conversation is that we need to keep the conversation ongoing. And yeah, and this is a really rapidly evolving area. And yeah, we will try to provide more clear guidelines. But so far, I think we need to talk more. Yes.
So is that the summary of the panel?
No, I mean, this is my summary of that panel.
Others, yes.
Yeah, we also discussed at the panel that AI should not be an author. So you cannot treat it as an author. This would actually imply that this is an independent form of contribution and judgment, independent of us, which it should not be. That's very important. And also, I want to back up what Claes said earlier. We need to develop guidelines for how to report the use of AI to make it transparent. But these guidelines will not be carved in stone. We have to have a new understanding of editorial policies or guidelines, because they may develop quickly. And what typically happens is that we lag behind. We already lag behind. We have technological process and we are in the midst of the discussion. And right now, there are no clear guidelines. Some journals have it, some haven't. But for the field of communication at large, or even for ICA journals, how should we do the reporting of the use of AI for scholarly work? How should this be done? And this is one of the big tasks we have. At the same time, I think one answer to this problem is, like I said in the beginning, we should destigmatize it. We should treat it as a normal process. And only if we do this, we can reflect on the challenges and problems. If we don't do that, it's like this: you have to admit that you have done that. Oh, you have used it. And with this mindset, it would be very, very critical to have an open discussion, open reflection, because people may not want to admit that, especially given the pressures in these high pressures that we are facing in academic work to get a job and everything. If something is stigmatized, people will not admit it because they may see it as a disadvantage. So we need an openness, I think, in the discussion in order to also critically reflect on the red lines and the boundaries.
Maybe picking up on that very quickly, I think we have to assume that we're all using it. And so that's the starting point, not the now you have to declare because you're an exception because you did it. And it would be great, I think, if ICA and its journals could say, okay, we're going to enter a phase where we need a process here and have that sort of joint, where do we draw the bar this year and next year and the year after? And this will evolve, but it would help us all as a field if we would enter that process together and do it jointly across, for example, the journals and the conferences and these kind of things, and it is a moving target. I just came out of a panel at the European Research Council, and they've taken a step forward of simply saying, okay, we assume that everybody is doing it, if not for anything else, because their formats really invite for it, right? You need to submit a 20-page document, a 5-page version of the same document, and a 1-page summary of that. If someone is not using some kind of aid to generate these different versions, they're doing a disservice to themselves. themselves. And they're embracing that and saying that's totally legit to do that when you submit the proposals. But then there are other uses that we simply want you to tell what we're doing, but there's no a priori boundary for how you can use it. Just tell us how you did it. And I kind of like it. I know it's not a perfect solution to it, but I like the fact that a research funding body that is praising itself for trying to fund new ideas and a little bit out of the box and high risk type of projects is simply saying, okay, we assume it is being used. Now talk to us about how you used it.
I think it's interesting to see the evolution. Here's another PhD opportunity for someone to see how this norms are evolving even as we go along. I think in the last year, I was getting ready to go on sabbatical, and I would see that different applications had different standards. Some said, absolutely no, Gen AI. Others said, tell us how you use Gen AI. Others encouraged you to use it to help facilitate this. The issue that you bring up, Claes, is important because while it may be very good to take a 20-page document to 5:1, we know that not only do Gen AI generally hallucinate, but when it comes to citations, they hallucitations. And so you have to think about the fact that very often the citations that it gives you are not real citations at all, even though they look completely legitimate. So that's your responsibility as a human to be accountable for that. Yes, go ahead.
I think this question, when it comes to publications and submissions and things like this goes back to the AI is not AI is not AI. I find that AI statements tend to be too vague, right? Like, yes, you need to tell me you used AI. Okay, well, if I used Otter to transcribe, and as a qualitative researcher, I want to know actually what method you're using to transcribe, right? But by the way, this is not just in our field. This happens in journalism. This happens in law. This is happening across multiple fields right now. But I think what's more helpful to people is guidance along the different types of AI or the different functions, right? Like, yes, your ChatGPT can write your abstract. It cannot write your paper. Or Grammarly is, there's, I think, more specific guidance is actually helpful to people. And it's really helpful to people who don't have experiences with AI. Again, this panel, we have a lot of experience with AI. But for people who are just learning to use it and enter it into their workflows, I think it's really important that we give better guidance, at least initially. I think that guidance will, have to go away. Like, no one is disclosing like they're using Google Scholar to find research, right? But then if you're using ChatGPT to write, so there's also this question of function that I think has to do with that. But I think we also, and this is the hard part about the study of communication, is we're broad. We have social scientists and we have people in humanities, and and we have people in between, right? And so what those different communities value, and we also have people who do performance, right? And so what those communities value in the creation of knowledge and scholarship can differ as well. So I think when it comes to thinking about these things, in terms of journals, like, do we have a blanket across ICA journals, or do we think more about that community and what that community values within that journal is another question. So I'm returning it to the we need more discussion,
Yeah.
But I think the discussion needs to be a little bit more nuanced and not treat everything as all the same.
Yes, Yingdan, thank you.
Yeah, I think I want to highlight from my perspective as more like a new faculty perspective who just started the lab. I also see this not only a top-down process, but also can be bottom-up efforts. So for example, do we have AI guidelines for our lab, right? And also what are or can we have one? I think it's very an uncertain question for me, because I think I discussed with a lot of colleagues. We both agreed this is very blurred, but maybe it's time for us to think about that from a more bottom up level, and then we can have more discussions of this, and then from the journal perspective, they can also having this both bottom up and top down discussions.
So that's a bit of what I think it goes back to what Claes is saying. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, see all the different options that may be there. But
yes, but I think the lab one is a really interesting one, right? Because that was the opening remark also. How do we create in those labs, in those institutions, in those research groups, the space to experiment with this, and where you do some stuff and maybe not use it as the real study, but you learn and you share back, and how do you organize that knowledge within the lab and across the labs? That's what I would love us to think about as lab managers and research group leaders or institute leaders.
So I, as an example of a dilemma that I recently encountered, Andrea, you talked about coding and content analysis and Otter.ai transcribing and coding. And increasingly, I'm seeing papers now where they do coding and do manual coding, but then they have an AI agent to do the extensive coding, and then to check on the AI agent's coding, they have other AI agents who are evaluating the coding of the first AI agents. And when I first read this, I said, this doesn't sound right. But there are ways in which they are demonstrating that there may be some potential to do those kinds of things. But that's an experiment that can be done in the lab to see whether, and Andrea's face tells me that she does not approve of this.
No, actually, so I was going to take us through a quick thought experiment. And this has to do with agents.
Yes.
For those of you who don't know, and some people have alluded to it, we can now build agents to approximate and to represent people. And when I was talking with a law firm recently, they're like, we're going to build judge bots in which we put an entire judge's ruling into this bot so we can figure out how it's going to rule. All right, let's say we pick a fellow in this room, put all their research into it. I'm a grad student. I have now created an ICA fellow bot. And I say, what's something I should study? Give me a question to study. And then you take that idea. And so it will, you can line up these agents to do a lot of work, right? So like at what point can I use an agent to come up with a research idea, right? And this goes back to that question of what are we doing and who are we? So
I would say as an aging fellow, I would put a different thought experiment. I would say I would be the one who would take everything that a young grad student has to say, put that into a bot, and then ask that bot to come up with a good research idea for me to do. Katya, you're patiently been waiting. Go ahead, you're next.
Oh, I was just going to say, we have one thing that we didn't touch on in terms of guidelines and what we're supposed to do institutionally is in newer research, one thing that we often want to do is have AI engage with human subjects. And I've been trying to do that. And as you might imagine, our IRB has no guidelines for this, right? And I cannot guarantee how a large language model will behave if I expose human subjects to it. So this is another space where we need a lot more work to kind of try and understand what the appropriate research behavior would be when human subjects and AI are interacting together.
Good. Okay.
We can ask in Zurich whether they think this is an issue too. Yes.
So we are all, I want to make sure I leave time for questions. So I'm going to jump ahead and you can answer it as you want, which is of course what we do anyways, but I'll ask a question and then you can answer it with whatever you want to say. The closing prompt is, looking ahead, what is one specific action at the level of either individual scholars, journals, associations, or institutions that you would most like to see our field take to ensure that AI serves to advance rather than erode the values of communication scholarship? The one thing at any of these levels.
Transparency.
I would say meaningful transparency in that it helps us. I do agree that we do need to destigmatize it. But we just need to help people understand how they're using it and disclosing in ways that are helpful. Yeah.
The uncomfortableness of moving in darkness and acknowledging that for the next years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my main take is also transparency and destigmatization, and also replicability of what we're doing. That's quite important. And we need a meta science of using AI in science. So we need a meta perspective on what we're doing, like on this panel, as a field of research.
Yeah.
I would say like validate. Okay.
Okay, very good. Katya?
I agree with everything that's been said, and just so that I say something different, I would say train researchers, train students to use LLMs. They seem like an intuitive tool to be using, but we have to teach them, teach responsible use, teach prompt engineering, teach how to deal with them.
I think Katya's point is a very important one. It talks about, we've talked, people like Esther Hargitay have talked about digital literacy, algorithmic literacy, and we now have to talk about literacy in the AI space. I know that our students are brilliant, but some of them, not that long ago, a student at a university that shall remain unnamed, provided their candidacy exam, and at the end, forgot to delete the sentence that said, I hope that this response meets your requirements. Let us know if you want me to ask a further, clarify anything in it. And you can imagine that created an awkwardness all around for the evaluators of the candidacy exam. So I think that's important. If I had to take the prerogative of the moderator and say one issue that we have not had a chance to discuss today, but I think is really important, especially for ICA as an international communication association, with the I being the emphasis, is the potential global disparities of this for research. Because if we think about the kinds of tools we have access to in North America and in Western Europe, et cetera, it gives us a lot of lift if we do it right. In the global South, they may get somewhat of a lift, but the gap between the haves and the have-nots in the Gen I space as a resource, as a tool for research, could really jeopardize our sort of desire to be able to uplift and decenter communication scholarship globally. Okay, with that, and almost exactly on time, we have 15 minutes or 14 and a half minutes left for questions. Do we have microphones that are roving, or do I need to make this my ICA 75 fitness program to run around the room?
Yeah, there you go.
You have one more? Okay. Is there someone who can move it? No. You stay. You have to answer the questions. You are not going anywhere. Let's see if we can get.
This is where you need robots.
Yeah, that's where we need. Yes. Okay, we have lots of hands out here. I see a couple on the table here, but that may be just my short-sightedness of looking here. But then we will go back to. Don't feel shy if you want. Yeah, I saw yours. Yep, I know you, Adam. I got you.
So yeah, thank you for allowing me to ask the first question here. So thank you for the wonderful panel here. Really learn a lot. I appreciate your thoughtful opinions on generative AI and things like that. So I think you have talked a lot about like research here. So I would like to ask a question regarding like how would you incorporate Gen AI or large language model into your teaching there? So, and how would you approach that? So for example, if you teach a class of computational methods, would you add a topic about LLM or multi-model analysis, or would you approach that from an ethical perspective to talk about transparency, or maybe on a higher level, you would add a statement to teach the students like the guidelines to use AI in this class? So how do you see this?
Yeah, good question. Let's focus, since this is a panel on research, let's focus on teaching.
I'm sorry.
No, it makes sense. Teaching about research methods and teaching about the process of research. That makes sense. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start first since I just finished my like spring quarter teaching on computational methods. So I think like two quick points. One thing is like for this year, I have 1 week particularly on LLMs. So like how LLM can be incorporated into understand text, visual, audio, and video. So that's like different from like the previous years of teaching that. And I think like the second thing is like because one of the very important part in my class is like we do a lot of like tool demonstration and also those like coding tutorial where I was trying to like incorporate like LLM to help students to like have them like to interact with LLM and then like to constructing their code. And sometimes it's unconsciously because we do those like tool demonstrate on Colab, and then I was like making like exercise for them, and then I realized Colab automatically generate all the code for that. So I feel like that's also like maybe like a challenge in like teaching this kind of methods as well.
Anyone else wants to add to that? We can take another question otherwise. So thank you for the question. Thank you, Yingdan, for the
I'll
response.
be really fast with the question. That's why we're sitting so close, because we're really invested in this topic. So I really love this conversation, and I think that next year you should have this again, because the conversations have to be ongoing. And next year you can add an AI agent to be on the table. So well as OpenAI demonstrated that they can understand conversation, and then they can summarize, and they also can contribute their insights. That would be super interesting if we do this next year with an AI participating in the conversation. And let's see how it works. Another thing that I think I learned a lot, and thank you for sharing the thoughts. But another point I think that we haven't really touched upon is a lot of new creativity with regard to the emergence of a new type of communication phenomenon. So on that aspect, Noshir studied a lot of like a new AI-human collaboration, and I also see that it's really emerging from the bottom up. So our students, the public, are really engaging with a lot of different AIs in very new ways that actually drive up a lot of new questions that the traditional paradigms or theories have not really thought about, like even not thought about because they're so new. Like on the level of interpersonal communication, on the level of emotional connectedness, all of this, I feel like we're really observing a new era that we do lack a lot of knowledge, even on the phenomenon. So that leads to my next question is from the journal's perspectives, right? If we're really talking about currently setting a lot of restricts, a lot of standards, and also grounding on the traditional theories, do you see that may impede some of the new knowledge creation process that arises from some of our work, like being submitted and then rejected because no one knows how to evaluate that? So if we're trying to encourage new knowledge production, I hope the community would be more open about accepting new ideas or just trying to get on the ground and see what people are doing, see how information is created, and then create some space for the new work to emerge.
Yes.
I mean, I think we've created that space in like human machine communication, right? An entire interest group around that. And then there's also like AI mediated communication. I think what you're trying to say is like, you know, we need to play around with this and there may be some concern, right? And so this is where this question of, you know, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, as well as disclosure, right? I think it's disclosure and, you know, the editors and the reviewers who understand this, you know, that's why we sit on, you know, we do these things, we know, right? And so I think it's not going to shut things down if we're very clear on guidelines, because you can still play around and you can still make arguments, and there's still journals that are more experimental. So I think that would be my response. I don't think it's going to really.
If I can add up to this wonderful point, thanks for bringing it up. I think we have two problems in the field that kind of lead to this conclusion that you just voiced. First of all, I think we have some theory anxiety. Really the anxiety to work solely to do theory work, primarily theory work as a field of communication. Where do the theories come from? And so I would, and this is one part of the problem. So in general, that I observe. And the second one is controversy. Understanding controversy not as a problem in the peer review process, but as a good thing. Mm-hmm. So rather than saying, well, there's fierce opposition against the theoretical idea, a new idea, and that's why this paper has to be rejected. It's actually good that we have controversy. So if there's fierce opposition against a new idea, this should actually be published and let the field decide what follows up from that. And especially with fast-pacing developments, I think we need to embrace this notion of controversy as something very positive and something that we have to, that I think that we have to embrace. I'm trying to do that as an editor. Of course, it's not very easy, but sometimes I also think, okay, and now I get very emotional, strong sentiment against this new idea. Maybe it's a good idea to publish it.
Mm-hmm. I think anytime we have, some people have gone so far as to say that this represents a paradigm shift in the way we do research. I'm not sure it is a paradigm shift, but I would concede it is at least a paradigm glide that we're going into at this point. But when you go through those experiences, you always will have the difficulty of finding a space for you to be able to publish it. But of course, tenacity is what pays off, and having enlightened editors like we have on the panel is very helpful in that respect. Okay, we have a question.
Yes, so this is primarily for the editors. Is it realistic to set a policy that still would not require authors frequently reach out to you in advance of any submission, asking whether things are okay? Because I think to my classrooms I have detailed policies. Here's when AI is allowed. Here's when AI isn't allowed. And then students just think of use cases I hadn't considered. They were well-meaning. They weren't trying to do anything dishonest. But then they submit something, and even if they were actively disclosing how they were using AI use, I would have said, oh, no, I would have never allowed that. So really, is it feasible to set meaningful policies that still would not frequently require us reaching out to you in advance to ask, well, is this allowed or is this not allowed under the policy?
I think it will be a continuous dialogue, but I think it has always been like this. When I've edited a couple of journals, and it was, first you bump up the ethical standards, then you bumped up the integrity of the review process itself. Then we went into how to treat open scholarship and how to treat the data material. And I think this dialogue is always an ongoing one, and this might be a particular rapid one, and one where the sort of the imagination of the cases occurs somewhat faster, but that it is going to be a dialogue. And it's also totally fine for us as a community to say, these are the guidelines of June 2025, and there will be other guidelines version April 2026.
This is going to be a cute discussion in about 10 years where we're like, oh, we can't believe we used to talk about that,
yeah.
Right?
Okay, one more question. Thank you again. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I know there's been a bit of conversation today about the creativity and efficiency surrounding using AI with research. I'm interested, something I've researched recently was the half-life knowledge. So if that's a concept that the panel's aware of, I'd be interested to hear your opinions on AI's impact to that, or either current impacts or potential impacts that you're perceiving.
Do you want to describe half-life knowledge a little more to make sure everyone in the audience?
Yeah, so the original, I think it's still a little dated, but it's that 10 years ago, half the knowledge that we have today did not exist 10 years ago.
So the exponential increase.
And then every 18 months, knowledge doubles. And depending on different fields and areas of knowledge, there's different rates for that.
So this is like the Moore's law, but applied not to computational capacity, but to knowledge production. Thank you. Yes.
I don't know whether I have an answer for this, but what I want to say that how much of the knowledge today are new? And if we use Shannon's definition of information, how much information are there? Do we really have the exponential increase of the information we need for our research? Or it's just a quantity rephrase of the same information or the same concepts? And so, yeah, so that's my thinking.
Okay, great. Yes, Jörg.
Great question. I think what is very important is the accumulation of knowledge. So because if we generate some knowledge in some context, in some country with some technology, this is not the final word. What we need is replication. We need accumulation. So if there are more studies and there are, in terms of efficiency, what you mentioned, right? If there are more ways that we get more evidence from other parts of the world, from other perspectives, I think that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, knowledge is only generated not with a single paper or a single piece, only accumulatively. So if there's more accumulation, maybe also more confusion, I would say that's a good thing.
Katya?
I was just going to say one thing that we haven't touched on yet is we have to be mindful about the relationship between AI and knowledge. And in some ways, it kind of democratizes knowledge by making a simplified version of it available to more people. It is a science communication tool. In another way, it is perhaps discouraging some forms of information and knowledge from being created, just because there's now a very straightforward way to kind of access them. So spaces like Stack Exchange or Wikipedia, where we were going to generate kind of new information about emerging phenomena, are going to be now perhaps in a sense abandoned by users who might have otherwise gone there to provide knowledge or seek knowledge, because we have generative AI. That also means less information for generative AI to ingest and learn from. And so it's a complicated cycle of how existing information and Gen AI are affecting each other.
One of the things that your question made me think about is that there have been some studies that have shown that the volume of publications, certainly in certain fields, has dramatically increased since the Gen AI. And that has obviously been implied is because of that. I don't think that there's a causal study done on it, but I think it's quite suggestive that Gen AI has contributed to the sudden increase in the volume of publications. That said, my colleague Dashun Wang at the Kellogg School of Management and his team has found that if you look at the ratio of disruptive papers versus incremental papers, disruptive papers are things that are changing, moving in a new direction, paradigm shifting, if you may, that ratio is now at an all-time low. That in fact, we were much more, the ratio of disruptive to incremental was much higher in the 60s and 70s, and that ratio has come down, which is, I think, potentially alarming, and talking about the extent to which AI may be contributing to the homogenization of knowledge production, which I'm not saying is necessarily happening, but those are concerns we should do. We are almost out of time here. So I just want to say that this moment and this conversation invites us to reimagine what we might view and value as communication scholars. Can we ensure that AI is augmenting rather than eroding human insight? Can we design practices that reward transparency, an issue that was brought up, support equitable access, uphold the integrity of our work? If anything else, this conversation underscores the need for us as a field to be intentional and not incidental or accidental in how we integrate AI into our research. So with that, let's give a round of applause to our fantastic panel. And thank you all very much. And maybe we will take you up on an offer having a similar panel along with an AI that doesn't know anything, but at least is a good stochastic paradigm. Thank you.
Thanks.